welcome for a special episode of The Art of Law. Joined, of course, is Mark Shaw, but we have a special guest, Mike Brown. Mike, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Sean, and thanks, Mark. Yeah, my name is Mike Braun. I was over 20 years with one of the big four, with Deloitte, many years of that in China, 15 years still here. And I set up with others a firm that does what I did before, financial advisory. And that is pretty much what we call business discovery and business diagnostics. And these all kinds of topics, mostly for foreign investors investing in China, and also helping them performance improvement, but also helping them to understand what's going on here. I was a student here in the mid-90s and the Mandarin language student, know this country for a long time. And of course, I know Mark for probably 15, 16 years now.
Thanks a lot, Mike. So just a little bit of
hair, Sean. I have that effect on people.
Unfortunately, for Mark, 15 years. Yeah, that's a prison sentence. Yeah. But as usual, everybody who registered on the Eventbrite will get a copy of this presentation, so no need to take notes. And I will put the recording on the YouTube channel as well. And of course, if you have any questions, just go ahead and put it in the chat. I can see them, and I know, and I'll try to shoehorn the questions in at the appropriate time. But just feel free to just plug it in whenever you do get a chance. This episode is, and we're really happy to have Mike here because we've discussed JVs before, but it's always good to get a little bit of a different perspective, not so much of a legal perspective when it comes to joint ventures. And the first couple slides here that we just want to go through with everybody today is a couple statistics and charts from the European Chamber's Business Confidence Survey, which for 2021. This graph right here shows that if you look on the left-hand side, around 30% of the European companies that were surveyed do have JVs. And then of those 30%, the pie chart on the right shows that 26% have increased their JV shareholding, with considering the changes in the equity caps in 2020. So I know that Mark's had some takes before on JVs. It's kind of changed with the tide, so to speak. And Mike, you've been here for so long too. How do you see JVs? Especially in today's market, is this chart kind of representative of what you've been seeing?
First of all, what the chart says is joint ventures are not the preferred way to invest in China. You see, the majority of my clients prefer to own the company completely. WOFIs are the preferred vehicle now. Now, why are they still joint ventures? Why are they still new joint ventures? I mean, everybody knows 20 years ago was often a legal requirement. Look at the car industry. This has changed, and many restrictions were lifted, but there are other matters: how to get to the market, how to get a certain business license, do I have the resources, alignments of interest. I do see, to a certain extent, I wouldn't say a rebound of joint ventures, but I do see clients now getting into joint venture negotiations because they hope they can achieve something they cannot achieve on their own. So it's not the preferred solution for most investors, but for some it is.
Mark, I think your opinion has changed on JVs quite often too. Is there something in line with what you are seeing?
Well, I think life has changed as well. So I think back in the 90s, people thought they had to do a joint venture. Sometimes they were legally required to do a joint venture. And, it was perhaps interesting that it was very often strong Western companies doing joint ventures with relatively weak Chinese companies, and Chinese companies often would promise distribution or promise things which they couldn't really do. I think in the last few years, look, WOFIs are pretty simple to set up. I think there's there is a bunch of companies for special reasons want to do joint ventures for the reasons that Mike said. And I think the difference now is it's often perhaps weaker Western companies. So not weak in the sense of, bad companies, but perhaps smaller companies with a niche product, and they're partnering with powerful Chinese companies. So that's one group we see. And then the other group is perhaps, high-tech companies that really have enough to do in their home markets and want to work with a Chinese partner. And that's a bit like the old big auto ones between, VW and SAIC or whatever, where you have big, strong companies working together. So I think, it is more joint ventures now, I would guess, than say 10 years ago, but you normally need a compelling reason to do a joint venture there. There normally is some thought, that's, but like Mike says, most are woofies, but the most interesting projects are joint ventures.
And this chart that we pulled from the survey as well gets to that point. And I think, this is the chart from 2021. It, like you said, Mark and Mike, this chart probably would have been a lot different 10 years ago. Just to summarize it, this chart shows those who are in JVs, are they looking to expand their shares? And I thought it was pretty surprising that the 28% and the 18% there were saying yes. They're actively looking to increase their shareholding, and 53% probably not interested now. But it seems that this is probably an indication that they are quite happy with the way they don't want to rock the boat, maybe perhaps, but yeah, this chart might have looked different 10 years ago. Mike, what do you think about this finding?
Yeah, well, what can I say? It's I do hear now there are two cases. Some that say, okay, it's working all right. Some say we have a governance deadlock. We need to move on. Either we buy out the other party, the Chinese party, or we get bought out. I have that discussion right now, actually, with a client from Europe. So there's quite some movement in there. And it also depends how old this joint venture is and why it was established. Just getting back to what Mark said, it really matters why this joint venture was established and when it was established. Foreign investors have much more knowledge now than they had 20 years ago, for sure.
I think the question's also misleading. I think is your company interested in expanding your share? So like Mike said, you buy me out or I buy you out. 20 years ago, you never heard of a Chinese company buying out the foreign company. It's very, very rare. But now it's quite a common occurrence. And so of that 53%, there might be 23% who say, I want to get the hell out of this joint venture. So, I mean, it is so positively framed, the question. It doesn't actually, discuss, potentially. It only says, oh, you must want to expand. There's a lot of people who are stuck in joint ventures, and it's difficult to get out. People think you can unilaterally get out. It's tough to get out of a joint venture.
So, Mark, do you think that extra, let me just do my math, that extra 46%, is that something that you would have seen maybe 10, 20 years ago? Foreign companies looking to actively increase their shareholding?
I don't really believe in statistics. I think the question's weird. I think the thing is, I don't think it's a useful statistic. I think, it's not how people think. It's not like, oh, I want to do it in 2 years. That might be in the auto industry where they've loosened the restrictions or whatever. I think the thing is probably 50 to 60% of joint ventures just kind of are there. Probably 20% are in a mess. And if people could get away from it, they'd be very happy. And probably 20% are very happy. That's probably my guess. 50% are muddling through, and then half of the other 50% want to get out. The other half, it's working kind of.
Yeah, that's true. This is the last slide for this section on that's from the survey, but I thought it was kind of interesting. It says in which areas have you experienced differentiated treatment, but it listed a lot of factors here on how these European companies who were surveyed feels that they might have been dealt with differently than a domestic company. I only put it here because I thought that, you know, how would this feel like? Of course, this is all just kind of opinions, but how would it affect if you were in a JV rather than in a WOFI, for example? Because in the next slide, we'll go into why do people want to get into joint ventures, and there's many reasons why. But do you guys think that? And I'll start with you, Mike. But do you think that one of the reasons that a foreign company might be interested in doing a joint venture in the first place is to kind of avoid some of these you know, unequal treatments?
Well, I never heard that from my clients. I think first of all, there are positive reasons why nowadays, at least, why companies opt for a joint venture, and it is like actually hopefully getting a better treatment than doing it on your own, right? Being completely exposed, visible as a foreign company. They try to be more fit in, and they think they can do that with a joint venture. So again, with these statistics, hard for me to comment on, but I think the motives are different. The key difference is obviously the governance model and the enforcement on your own to say what can we do and what can we not do.
Yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time on that slide, but I just thought it might.
Right. So if I could just make a quick comment though, just on those first two, the market access, public good, I think it really depends. We've got a case at the moment where we have a majority joint venture and the Chinese partner wants to take the majority because they just can't act in public tenders because you have to be, and so that's legitimate. It's not a legal thing, but it's just in the tenders. And I just have to laugh. The rest of them, you know, licenses I could imagine, but everything from communication with the government down, I think it's pretty unbelievable what they've said.
Yeah.
My favorite is here, national security issues, that 14% of them experience differentiator. Yeah, I've only, in 30 years, only seen one case of the national security. I didn't even know they existed until those guys turned up to the client's office. So it's hard to believe 14% have experienced not only interactions with them, but differentiated experience with national security. So yeah, I guess, again, I'm a bit wary of people taking the wrong messages from this kind of information.
Yeah. I didn't want to spend too much on. I'd rather spend more time on here, and this is, I guess, kind of different factors on why you know, a foreign company might be interested in entertaining the idea of entering a joint venture. And we have a lot of different factors here. Like you mentioned, Mark, you know, licenses is definitely going to be one, but they're all various in kind. So maybe Mike, just do you want us to give us a quick view, in your opinion, on which ones do you think are kind of the main highlights, the main attractions for foreign companies to enter into a JV?
Yeah, so I think that's pretty easy to answer. And again, I'm talking about the joint venture formations that take place now. That's pretty much commercial reason, right? Commercial, and when I say legal reason, like we have that pointy red tape. Sometimes I did a lot of work, and I still do, in life science and healthcare. And sometimes it's not a restricted industry, but the practice of the local authorities is that they are very, very concerned. Asia in general is a license-based practice, not only China. So you cannot just do things just because you have the technical capability. So red tape is very important to have a Chinese partner who helps with that distribution. And sometimes when I say M&A, and that is very often a misunderstanding by some advisors, sometimes a joint venture is the result of an acquisition. You buy into a Chinese company, and very often people forget that. So I would say commercial reasons to say, we think with the resource, and I think Mark made a very good point to say now sometimes European, American companies that might not be small, but they might have 5,000 people worldwide say, I do not have the resources really to set up a shop in China on my own, or set up or create a distribution network that I need, or deal with all the very complex registration of my medical devices. There can be many reasons, but I would say, long story short, mostly nowadays, commercial reasons, advantages they hope they're looking for to obtain that they cannot obtain on their own. And the joint venture is just a vehicle to align interests.
Mark, does that kind of fall in line with what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I think so. I think all those things are. I mean, the only thing we see on top of it is sometimes people. Yeah, it's a pretty new thing, but people have seen what's happening in the Chinese stock exchange, like Star Exchange. So we do have a project at the moment where a foreign company wants to like move all of its existing China business into a joint venture with a large Chinese enterprise with the goal of listing it at some stage. So that's something probably unthinkable 20 years ago. So I think, it's also this bifurcation of the market. So it might also be that, not even a company that has 5,000 people, maybe they've got 10,000 people worldwide, but they're so busy in Europe and North America, they think, well, let's use our technology and we'll find the right Chinese partner. We do have these strong Chinese companies now, and let them take that kind of technology, build the China market. And it might be a slightly different technology 10 years from now, but it's a bit like the, Yahoo Alibaba investment. I don't know, it was like 20 years ago. Yahoo's biggest asset was its shareholding in Alibaba. So I think that's what we're seeing a bit as well, is that people are interested in the China market, but maybe they think now, if it's not a niche product, if it's a consumer-facing product, probably it's better for a Chinese team to build it and we'll just be helpful instead of always wanting to run everything.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of benefits. I mean, that last slide we talked about, why would you want to enter a JV? And it sounds like, if they can help you reach the market, or if they, have access to extra resources that you might not have, that all sounds all well and good. But like we saw in the earlier slide from the survey, only 30% of the companies that were surveyed are actually in joint ventures. So it is, like you said, Mike, it is not the preferred vehicle for international companies to do business in China. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why JVs are challenging.
Yeah, well, I think most of us, and also the viewers here, have seen this, and I don't want to spend too much time on each individual point, but it is important to be reflective and to really recognize the issues. It all comes down to power. It really comes down to power. Who has the power? It's all about the governance. How do I make it work? A joint venture, these are usually two, sometimes more commercial organizations that get together to achieve a common goal. And the reality, both sides want different things, or the alignment only exists for a couple of years. And the things I'm outlining here, or that you outlined here, conflict of interest, because, for example, a state-owned enterprise teams up with someone has different interests than let's say, a Western company that is owned by a private equity firm. Culture is different, compliance plays a very important role, an ever-increasing role, but it is all about governance at the end of the day. And what I would say, without saying too much, but I think the takeaway is, for me, after so many years in China, a smart governance that can deal and respect and recognizes the challenges and is designed accordingly can help tremendously. It is about power struggle at the end of the day, why joint ventures can work or why they don't work.
And we will get into a little bit later in the presentation on some of the managing issues once the JV is in place, but we wanted to start off with this governance issue first. And Mike, this slide, which thank you for presenting to us. This one is really interesting. I think it gets to your point. It seems a little bit complicated, but maybe you can just kind of break it down for us.
Yeah, in a nutshell, and I know when the three of us did a rehearsal, so Mark said, wait a moment, that's a bit negative. Well, but the way I see it, and again, I work probably, I don't know, on dozens of joint ventures. I'm an accountant by training. So it starts with honeymoon. Everybody's so optimistic about the Chinese market, and there are good reasons for that. And actually the strategy very often makes a lot of sense, when you look at that, and there have been strategy advisors, and have you not? And but I do see that many joint ventures have a certain life cycle, and you see that here. There is an operational phase And once that starts, very often it starts very positively for a couple of years. But then comes the time where one party doesn't contribute anymore for whatever reason. Can be complacency on the Western side. I've seen that many times, but it can also be that maybe the local partner says, look, I think we have moved on technology-wise and we don't need that anymore. And I think when we negotiated joint venture, the situation was different, whatever it was. But then you see, and that is the blue curve that shows like the sales or the profits, they go down and it becomes critical. I've seen that hundreds of times, that suddenly the financial performance is not there, or there are no dividends that are distributed, or the liquidity is gone despite book profits. I mean, this is one of my stable products is really look, where is the liquidity? And you have that because of the different interests, and that was shown on the previous slide. So very often, I know Mark is a little bit more optimistic than I am, but it goes to a point where both sides are not happy with each other anymore. And then the ending phase is the divorce, is where they split ways, if they can. And you see, when you look at this, whether it is always like that or not, it's important when you create a joint venture agreement, which is not just a legal document, we come to that later, that you think about, what do we do if it's like a marriage, maybe, you know, what do we do if it doesn't work anymore? Have we thought about it? What is the protocol to get out of this without taking each other's face down and respect each other? And very often this is forgotten because there is honeymoon, because the wrong people are talking to each other. So from my perspective, this life cycle chart is typical for many joint ventures I've worked on.
Yeah, I have a slide here that Mark can explain soon, but I mean, Mike and Mark both have been in China, you know, advising on joint ventures for so long. Mark has been 25 years, I guess, and Mike,
30
I guess,
years.
30 years. Wow. Wow. Okay.
I only look young.
So
but
it is.
sure, I don't. Yeah, I say I don't think I'm like that much more optimistic about the whole thing. But I think the thing is, I think, you know, from a legal perspective, yeah, when we have these problems with joint ventures, yeah, of course I'll look at the joint venture contract or whatever. But some people act like the joint venture contract is the U.S. Constitution and all the wisdom will be in that document. And I think you have to realize it's a dynamic document, and the document doesn't lend itself to being dynamic because, you know, any change needs to be agreed by the partners. People don't often look at it after they've signed it until there's a crisis. Very many of them are not drafted very intelligently as well, which is an issue. But I think the problem is it would be better to have a joint venture where you meet every quarter and discuss the business plan, which is what I think Mike's talking about, than having the world's greatest joint venture contract. Because, yeah, very often, even if you go back in time, you wouldn't really know how to get out of it by putting in the joint venture contract. And lawyers in particular, they always love the joint venture contract. We have this, you know, case which has been going on for 20 years, and then just a mess, but probably a mess for 5 years. A new lawyer from America came in because, you know, anyway, long story. And this new lawyer from the American firm, you know, in Hong Kong, Chinese person, their immediate thing was, well, we'll look at the joint venture contract and, you know, we'll see. I just thought, well, yeah, that's just naive, you know. It's been going on for 20 years. Probably more interesting though, what are the emails? What are the things people have been doing? Yeah. So I think the thing is, the joint venture is more than the contract. It's about how people interact. Just one last point. We have this other joint venture, which we didn't work on. It was established back in the early 90s. Yeah. The first time I've looked at it. And, you know, I didn't look at the termination clauses or anything like that. I just thought, Jesus, the Western partner is a big company with 10,000 employees doing this business for 50 years. The Chinese partner has 10 individual shareholders who are now 30 years older. They must have very different ideas now about, like, one probably wants to continue building their business. The other one's thinking, I want to enjoy an apartment in Hainan, you know. So there's these kind of dynamic things, and people often don't look at life or time. They just think, oh, yeah, let's look at the piece of paper we signed 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm.
And on the screen here, if I could just go back really quickly, this part that Mike was talking about earlier, where it starts to go down. This slide just shows some of the reasons why, the various reasons why that downwards curve might be happening. We have a question here from Mike. Would you say that the board, the governing body, the process in JVs is still evolving? Does the JV board include independent directors?
Okay, I think, by the way, Sean, this is a question from Julia Zhang, and I think it's a very good question. May I say a few words about that, and maybe then Mark can share his views. Actually, I see this rarely happening. I see kind of absolutely sometimes, I must say it, absurd members of the board. I mean, I have a case, it's a while ago, that the chairman was based in a foreign country, could not come to China, chairman and legal representative, a foreign national who does not speak Chinese. And they had to make a change, and they needed the local, the foreign diver to attend, who was a board member. And there was no way to get that person over because of COVID. And we're coming to COVID in a moment, and it has a tremendous impact on joint ventures in particular. So yeah, Julia, to answer your question, no, it's not very common. I think, I don't know why, I think there are excellent people, outside people that would be perfect for that. But I think the issue is very often the board representation is like each side appoints people they trust. And that culture that you say, I bring someone in who has the time, the expertise, and yeah, the right alignment is not there. It's not like a culture like in Western countries where you have these independent board members. I must say, I haven't seen this at all probably in my 17 years on the ground. So I think it's something they should think about, but I guess the impediment is that people say, who can I trust, and will the other joint venture partner accept that? Hard to say, but it's definitely something I don't see. Mark?
I've never seen an independent director. In the old day, previously, I'd been a director on a few joint ventures, appointed by the foreign party, just to have somebody a bit on the ground. And there were two problems. Firstly, King Wood said, you have to stop being directors on companies. And secondly, often these companies thought, why are we paying him to turn up for board meetings? He doesn't really do anything. But they were the two things that stopped me. But the issue is also, a joint venture really is never an independent company in China, not the ones that we are working with. You know what I mean? Like it is actually just the board reflects the shareholders meeting or something. So if I was appointed by, say, a German company to be a director, and I voted against what the German shareholder wanted to do, I would be very quickly a former board director. So they would just immediately revoke you. So I think really it's like a shareholder meeting, not a board meeting. I think even boards, and there's fiduciary obligations, but I've never seen it come up in practice as a real issue. But really the board directors should owe their duties to the joint venture. But I think in reality, they always line up behind the interest of the shareholder, which appointed them.
Thank you.
But I think, just to add a few points, or one point, I agree with you, Mark. It is like that, and there is nothing wrong with it. But what I see is very often that people are not suitable. They cannot even represent the interests of their own, let's say, the shareholder they're working for. So I think Julia's question is a quite interesting one, because I do think it would be possible to have people on the board as they appointed you, because I'm sure your loyalty was towards your client, but you knew the country and you were able to understand what's going on. You were physically present. And I do think personally that some board compositions are sometimes part of the root cause why there's misunderstanding and sometimes also friction in the communication process.
Thanks a lot for that, Julia. If you have any follow-ups, just put it in the chat. But getting back to the presentation here, it seems like, the stuff that we've been discussing, a lot of the, I guess, issues that crop up need to be kind of nipped in the bud from the beginning. So we have a slide here that was also thank you to Mike for providing that gets into some of the negotiation issues, when you're putting together thinking about the joint venture. So Mike, want to take us through this?
Yeah, okay. Well, this chart is a little bit how I've seen things so many times. And I think of the old school way that I don't think makes sense in China because of the challenges, because of the demanding situation in China, language, culture, law. So the old school way is shown like a king here, the two CEOs of the two organizations, or whoever the negotiation leader is, they very often meet in five-star hotels and very expensive restaurants. They gunbei and they do big picture things. And then they bring their headquarters teams, like head of legal, head of finance, head of whatever. And then you have legal teams, very often the head of legal, whatever, with the other team, and then they have law firms as a supporter. But what happens is a top-down approach. It's a top-down approach where things don't get refined to a level where it should be discussed. And because of the top-down approach, and by the way, the boss never wants to hear about problems. If you say, this is a problem, if we agree to this, you have a problem yourself. I've seen that very often in Western companies, that they do not, that everybody sees the problem. Yeah. For example, they say, oh, we want to consolidate, we want 51%. They don't understand it's not just an accounting gig. It means you need to hand over control. There are certain things that are attached to that demand from the joint venture party. And nobody dares to say anything. And the outcome of this happens then years later when someone says, hey, why don't we distribute the profits? And someone says, sorry, the board says no, and we have the majority. And then they think, oh, what went wrong? So I see very often this type, the chart you see is a negotiation and formation process that I see very often top down. The bosses agree, don't want to hear bad news. They push it down to their staff teams, and there are no operational experts involved, or very few, or they have nothing to say. They push it down to legal teams, and they just do what they are told. So it's not a quality arrangement. Many points that could come up that would explain potential operational challenges, how to deal with them, never get discussed in that type of formation process.
So continuing off of that, here we have kind of I guess, a reimagining of how to fix those problems. And the biggest difference being this central part of the chart here, Mike. So given what you've just said, what does this chart kind of tell us how we should be thinking about this approach?
So for those who are not dizzy yet, and they see all these arrows and process flows, the big difference here is you have now those who will work together later. Joint venture could also mean that maybe some people sitting in Chicago will be very important for the joint venture because of the technical support, because of transferring IP. So it's very important that technical people, finance people, compliance people, and that people on the ground, HR teams, sit together in their respective subject topics, sit together for weeks, say, I met with Mr. Wong met Mr. Smith, and we run for all the topics about how we want to run working capital, how we want to run the production, how we want to procure, how we want to maintain compliance, because very often foreign companies have to be compliant. And the consolidation rules nowadays, particularly 50-50, is like equity consolidation, means you are accountable for what's going on in this joint venture. And the Department of Justice in the United States, for example, wants to know if you're doing something funny. And if you say, sorry, I'm not in charge of sales, I'm not in charge of procurement, I didn't bribe anybody, this doesn't work. So it's very important that the middle level, the operational experts who know what the company really does, sit together from both teams, align what they do, come up to their bosses, to their team, say, look, the joint venture cannot be all the technical blueprints, but if we know already certain things must be done in a certain way, when we know already if we have a technical problem, there should be a certain protocol, then put it in a joint venture agreement. As long as you know that, it's fine. It's a completely different form of negotiation. You negotiate, you understand, you solve problems before they exist, and you say, okay, maybe we don't know the answer now, but this is how we want to deal with that when we work together. So the joint venture agreement reflects the commercial reality much better than a top-down approach. And the CEOs, they can still do their signing ceremony, but they don't push down their let's say, iron demands onto the teams without respecting the realities of the operational details.
I mean, this sounds very, very methodical, Mark. In practice, do you see a lot of companies, kind of going towards that, or utilizing that approach, or is it mostly more of the old school model that Mike mentioned in the previous slide?
Yeah, I think most companies don't do what Mike says. I think most companies just have a group of people, and then it's even there's a big disconnect between the people who've done the agreements and then people actually implement it. And if you weren't there, you don't even know what was really meant by the agreement, because not everything is always clear, especially if things are complicated. And I think the other problem is a lot of advisors are also a bit useless. They just take the last template contract, just use that, and like stenographers just change it. And so we had a project like last year. The contract was drafted by somebody else, and I looked at it. They weren't happy with the law firm, so they asked us to revise it. And I said, oh, okay, it looked like an okay joint venture contract. I said, well, it's probably easier just to amend it, not redo it, because the other side's seen the contract. And after a day, I had to give up. I just couldn't work out how it could work. And it was a big manufacturing joint venture. And I said to them, well, where are you going to do the manufacturing? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, are you going to lease a site, or are you going to build a site? Where are you going to do it? And they said, oh, well, we have to build it because it's very, this is the main issue, is we have to build it. And I said, but your joint venture contract doesn't even have one sentence about that. It has like 4 pages on US compliance or something, but there's not even one sentence on the fact that you're going to build a building, where you're going to build it. So, that's a problem too. People often just paint by the numbers and think it will be in there, but it doesn't actually help. It's, you don't start with 0 or a blank piece of paper, but do enough thinking to make sure you cover the most important things,
So what we have here in this slide and the next slide are just some of the, I guess, these common issues where it seems common friction points where there's just not a meeting of the minds, I guess, on how to operate. We don't need to go through each one of these, but maybe Mike, if you want to just highlight one that you think is probably the one that you see the most, or is the one that interests you the most.
Yeah, well, that's simple. I'm an accountant, I'm a finance guy, and the big issue is profitability and cash flows. That is the big issue. At the end of the day, these vehicles are made to make money. And this is where things sometimes fall apart. And the other points, like hiring friends and family, are just building up to the issue that you say, hey guys, where is the money? And when there are profits, why is there no liquidity? I think it is the financial performance is the issue number one, and it is the result of behavior. Yeah. So this is clearly, if someone says, Mike, you can only pick one of all these many points on this slide, it is profitability, cash flows. It is a problem because they are not working together. People thinking of themselves. Governance is weak, control is weak, because people they understood the strategy, they understood the Chinese market, all wonderful, but you know what? That's not enough.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And in this slide, we have some more, I guess, legal issues. And we've talked a little bit about this before, Mark, in the previous episodes, but Mike gave us his viewpoint from, a finance side, maybe from a legal standpoint, which one of these many points, I guess, do you think is kind of the most common occurrence in your point of view?
So I think that what Mike said is the right answer. I think, the thing is, what Mike said before is also saying, I say very commonly, that people always know there's a problem overseas. And if financial performance is strong enough, people will fight and say, oh, look, Sean, you don't understand, China, yeah, if the money's rolling in, if it's growing, it doesn't matter. People, it'd be like us in the law firm. If we had a partner, if he brought in more money than anybody else, but he never turned up to the office, we'd say, great partner. So we probably would only start measuring him if he doesn't bring in the money. So I think there could be many reasons for the financial performance issue, and like Mike said on that list, could also be more competition or something. But that's what triggers the problems. And so here, the first four are just more like key items when you're looking at joint venture. The one which we're talking about now is the exit. And I think you have a lifespan. 95% of people doing joint ventures, if you say to them, well, what's the end game? They just look at you like, I don't know. What do you think it should be? And so you need to think about what's going to happen, because we all get older. Look, Mike looks much older now. It's 16 years old. So everybody gets older. So, we have to be prepared, not just wistful, so we have to start thinking about what is the plan? Is the plan you hand it to the Chinese side, or do you do it as a woofie? You need to have a plan, and hardly anybody ever does this.
Yeah. So once, that plan, I guess, is sort of, people will watch this episode and they'll, make sure that they have this meeting of the minds and they understand the intents of all the parties involved. So I just want to switch the conversation a little bit towards more of just, I guess, day-to-day managing of the joint venture, because on that curve that we showed before, Mike, it does seem to go down at some point. So I guess managing that downwards curve from that slide is kind of the section that we want to talk about now. So managing JV operations.
Yeah. I think people watching want to hear positive news as well, and not only the negative stories that you can hear about everywhere. Now, well, the reality is there are, as Mark said, many joint ventures do work very well, and even if they just work mediocre, it's fine. They're growing, and as long as money comes in, everybody's happy. So what you see here are the key points that I think. In the middle, you see the right team. It is about information. It's transparency, yeah. And you see the green box, headquarters, to stay involved. One of the biggest issues, because people tend to finger point or point fingers at the local partner, and sometimes right, sometimes it's not justified. The reality is the Chinese side very often is here. They're staying there. They have been in negotiations. They stay on board. On the Western side are employees. They were whatever, head of business development. Now there are whatever, a CFO in Brazil. I don't know. They're gone, and they don't stay involved. And they don't understand that this is a living organism that needs constant nurturing, like a woofie as well. But in the woofie, you have the power to make changes and fire people, hire people, and sell things. But in a joint venture, it's more complex. So I think being involved, being committed, and maintain the relationship. China is what I find is a great thing. It's a society where relationships among people stay, whether you leave the company or not. At least the local partner is willing to do this. So, and I think that's something that the foreign side needs to understand, and to replace the CFO every 2.5 years or whatever. Always bring in a new guy that the other side says, look, I'm here in this joint venture now for 15 years, and you are number 12 I'm talking to. They need to understand this is disruptive. So it's all about commitment. And I think this is the most important. When you say have the right team, it's not just which business school did you go to, because that absolutely does not matter.
Mark, you've been involved in a lot of joint ventures as well. Is there any common traits, in the successful, or even the ones that are just at least profitable joint ventures that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there's always the outlier on the profitable ones, because we have had a few, even some old ones, where it was a majority Chinese shareholder and the foreign shareholder was like a technology or a brand, and the Chinese just did stuff and they got a free ride. But that's a rare one. I'd say the ones who've been successful, out of all those points, I would have picked the same one that Mike did, was about the headquarters being involved, not just in supervision, but being relevant. So, if you want to do a joint venture, if you want to do a wholly foreign owned enterprise in China, like no one's forcing you to do it. Maybe your suppliers or your customers are, but if headquarters is not relevant to the operation, why the hell did you do it? So I think it's not just about supervision, but it's also about adding value. Bringing technology. That was one of the things on Mike's thing. Like, China's a competitive place. So if you're bringing yesterday's technology, probably the joint venture won't be successful either. If you're not, and I think with Chinese people culturally, and I'm always worried about culture because we're talking about 1.4 billion people, but I do feel, having been in Europe for a while now, Chinese people, it's like those fortune cookie stories. It's actually, but it is, I think, true. They do value that long-term relationship much more, I think, than Westerners who are more transactional. If you're sick in hospital, all the Chinese would come to the hospital. First, you'd think perhaps they're just coming to see maybe, you die or something. It's interesting for them. But you actually feel they care about it. Whereas in the West, nobody will turn up. You'd be lucky if they send you some flowers. So I think, Chinese people do really value that relationship. And it doesn't really matter if you're overseas, as long as you do visit them and you do show that you're involved and it matters. I think it matters much more than in the West, is what I would say.
Totally agree. Yeah, and can I say, just to emphasize that, it's very important for our Western viewers here. Sometimes you can fix a problem by talking to the other chairman, and if they see you really, absolutely, if there is a good relationship, they try to make it work. That helps much more than, sorry for saying that, Mark, involving the lawyers, which just escalates the situation,
Yeah.
And so I think investing in the relationship pays off. It really is a measurable advantage.
I don't mind when people attack lawyers because I don't actually feel like I'm really much of a lawyer. But the thing is, what I think is important, just because it is very similar. One thing which I've noticed with joint ventures, well, if there's a problem, if you can't solve it with the partner, it's very often the authority rather than a court. And it took a time for me to work this out, but it's the same point that Mike's making with the other side's chairman. The way to build a relationship with somebody is not to come with a problem. It's, for a few years, you show good faith, you try to help them out. If they come to Europe, you pick them up from the airport or whatever, you build a basis of a relationship. If the first time you reach out to the other side's chairman or the local authority and says, look, your bastards have been stealing money, I want to sue you, I want to do this, it's not the easiest way to have a friendly, cooperative discussion. So I think you start early, and if you do it, it will reduce the risk of the joint venture going wrong. But if it does go wrong, it increases the chance of finding a non-toxic exit to the situation.
I have another question, and it's pretty on topic, so I just bring it up here. Someone messaged me directly. In general, how well do the Chinese and foreign JV partners identify and communicate their shared objectives? It seems they need truly neutral parties to facilitate this, so it's not just in each party's own interest. So I guess the question here is, when these issues do come up, what is the best course of action, I guess, in terms of communicating this through the cultural barriers, through some of the financial factors of the business? How do you guys see that problem being solved? I'll let Mike go first.
Okay. Well, I think, don't forget, for most people, a joint venture is something they might do once in their life, maybe twice. This is already something. So for most people, this is a new territory. So now, does that mean bring in any advisors? Well, it depends. Unfortunately, I need to say that I do believe that you should look for someone who has that experience and who you think has proven to be successful. These people who have a positive attitude towards China, because that's where we're talking about joint ventures in China and not in Indonesia, for example. So positive attitude, are familiar with some basic financial and legal terms, and know how people work normally in these joint ventures. And I do believe, I don't say that because I am advisor, I am, and I think or hopefully I have added value to my customers, but I do believe if you don't have any experience, it will be a tough journey. And because it's not a usual thing we do every day.
And Mark, we've been sitting on this slide for quite some time, finding the right GM, but I assume that this is something similar to what you would say.
I think the slide's taken out of context. This was more about the dynamic of finding the joint ventures and general manager. But I think on the query that was asked, I think it resonated with me what Mike said a few slides ago about the kings. And, maybe it's the emperor's new clothes, the emperor's naked. And look, I think it's difficult. And I think there's not many advisors, because advisors who tell it to you straight, because with these kings, look, we've got a case at the moment, and, there's deal destiny. For me, it's clear the Chinese side and what the foreign side want are really 100% opposed. Like the Chinese want the technology, the foreigners want to build up their own business in China, and the Chinese want to build up their own business. And, it's totally diametrically opposed. And it doesn't matter what they end up signing, it will be a disaster in a few years' time. This is for me without any doubt. But people have committed to it. They've had that discussion, etc. An advisor, it might be really useful to actually just say, this is bullshit. But the danger for the advisor is, firstly, that means, the project's over for them. So you have to find somebody who really is so outspoken. And secondly, you get, sometimes people like it, but very often they get very upset at you if you say this. So it's difficult. So, I've done it a few times. I got into trouble, or they never called me again. And I think, the dynamics of the West is more complicated for me than the Chinese. So I'll give you another clear example. We were doing a project where we were buying a company in China for an American company, big company, you'd all know the name. And anyway, there was a complicated issue. And I had seen this issue was going to be a problem for the closing, because it was a retail company. So it would have been millions of dollars of stock, and how we would calculate. But anyway, I said to the in-house lawyer, who was senior from headquarters, hey, look, don't we have to change this, because otherwise your guys will not be able to do that stock take. It'll be a mess on closing. And he said, don't mention it. If he thinks he can do it, it's not our problem. We're just here to get the agreement signed. When the agreement's signed, we're no longer involved, and it's up to them to fix it. And I tell you, I was shocked. I was shocked. I think, rarely shocked in my life like that. I thought, fuck, that doesn't really have that fair play principle. You know what I mean? And it's, and so that's why sometimes with Western clients, it's more complicated with the Chinese, because the Chinese, people go on about all their complicated things, but they normally have an alignment that it says, we're following what the boss says. Whereas in Western companies, sometimes you're not really sure who's doing what for what reason. So that's the complication I see. So I think your question was, can a middleman or an advisor or a consultant? Sure, it would be great. But I think it would be a more valuable thing to stress test things rather than just flowery words. That's what I sometimes see with these investment bankers. They say what both sides want to hear, but don't confront the problems. It's better to confront problems. Because if you can't deal with the problems before you sign and send the money over, you're definitely not going to deal with them after they've got the money and the technology,
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, just put it in the chat, or you can send it to me directly. Both are okay. Just this last part of the presentation here, I guess kind of goes back to the what you mentioned earlier about Mike, about COVID kind of changing or maybe highlighting problems in an even brighter lights than before. So I know you briefly mentioned it before. This chart, by the way, is just again from that that survey, but the details are here just because I'll be sending the copy of the presentation I'm going to look at later. But maybe Mike, you just want to give us, your take on how COVID has shaped this, how has shaped dealing with JVs.
Yeah. Just in one sentence, it has substantially weakened the control over a joint venture to an extent hard to describe. Don't forget, it was common practice that the chairman of the other side flew over, show courtesy, show respect, internal controls, internal audit departments flew over. You had your own auditors doing some work here and there. There were all kinds of interactions, and COVID has created a complete end to this.
And you have to do like if you're coming up with it on your own.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh no, it's okay.
Okay, so I think we're coming to an end. So I just want to say control and supervision has substantially been impacted now for the foreign side because traveling is very difficult now. If you don't have a residence permit, a work permit, it's usually the number of foreigners locally deployed is very small. And it's very difficult, and it's now limited to monthly reports that are very often not the right instrument. And that, of course, has weakened the ability to build relationships and trust with each other. So COVID is a huge impact on what a joint venture needs. Is a permanent dealing with each other, permanent working with each other, visiting each other. Also for the Chinese party that visited the other side, I think it's a big issue.
And I just want to get, we're almost out of time, but I want to get Mike's opinion on just one more opinion. I guess this is also from the survey. It's also about the taxable allowances for foreign hires and will affect foreign companies who are more likely to have foreign employees in China. And since Mike has this accounting background, we talked a little bit about COVID in 2021 and managing JVs. But how has this also been caused as much of a stir as well in terms of managing JVs?
I would say to some extent, I don't think it's so crucial, but obviously, by the way, these changes have been implemented in Singapore a long time ago. So equal taxation for everyone. It's particularly an issue for those who have kids and need to send them to international schools. For them, it's a particular issue. I never understood why a foreign expat got these massive housing allowances. Overall, I don't think it is that important for joint ventures, but of course it increases the cost. But you know what? If you want to have the right team on the ground, the representing the foreign side, you need to have people who have, and now I'm not talking as an accountant, I think you need to have people with the right mindset, with the right heart, and the right motivation. And I don't think, yeah, tax law is annoying, but I don't think it's so crucial.
Mike, Mark, any last words you want to say about the COVID thing or the?
Yeah, I think it's I think like the last year or last 2 years, we've had many less transactions than we would typically do, but I think we've actually had a lot more people asking us questions about compliance or internal things. So maybe that's the tick up, is that people are relying more on us for that. So that's kind of balanced out our loss in M&A. So I think what Mike says is correct. I think people are losing a bit of control and things are bubbling forward now. So yeah, I'm sure people would like to reassert themselves once things get easier.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this topic with everybody today. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mark, for sharing your expertise. Once again, everybody who signed up will get a copy of this presentation. I'll also put a link to this recording on YouTube so you can share it with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions, Mike will also be CC'd on that email, so you can feel free to just reach out to Mike directly. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and see you next time. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you.